remember my parents watching it way back in the early years.
Old guys, big microphone, spray it with something to kill it. And the deader, the better, right? Yeah, yeah. So, and unfortunately, pretty much a lot of our questions are, what can I spray it with? Don't do that. Don't do that. So we are going to be asking, I hope in the first script, but I haven't seen the first script yet, viewers to send us your your stories about, your parents, your grandparents, your children, your grandchildren with Backyard Farmer. And we're going to air, I think once a month, we're going to try to air one of those. We haven't quite figured that out yet. And also your geriatric landscapes. So, well, if you think about it, I mean, I gave a presentation on what's new is old again, what's old is new again. Yeah, because, I mean, everything has a life cycle, and unless you renew your landscape, it just keeps getting older, right? So our intention is to pass those around. So each panelist looks at it and says, okay, well, if I had this landscape that needed to be renewed, I would do, or I would look for, or I would. So we're hoping we get quite a bit of interest in that. So we'll see. 65 years is a long time to be up and running on television with no breaks, at least not as near as I can tell. I'm good to go. Do you want me to turn lights off?
I will.
Okay. Okay. All right. I'll start talking for real. So I thought, just because I am talking about trees and shrubs, and it was difficult to drag a tree into the room, I would bring you a shrub, which is what? Forsythia. Who has forsythia in their landscape? You all should. Why? Because it does this when there is no sunshine, right? That is really the reason to plant forsythia. It was a bad year for forsythia because they budded too early, and then those buds froze off, and then they're kind of going like this. So I cheated. This was at Home Depot for sale for $10. And I figure for $10 in 1 week, it's worth it, right? But anyway, that's why I brought that in. No other reason other than some sunshine on a gloomy day. Okay, trees, please. Shrubs, sure. What is a tree? Woody plant, one main stem, at least 15 feet tall. Right? Sure, right? Like that white oak. We don't expect to see a white oak shorter than 15 feet or with multiple stems. What's a shrub? A woody plant under 15 feet tall. Never tree-like, never say never, right? Branched from the base. So canes or stems from the base. Such as these, which are what? Burning bush, dwarf winged euonymus. Good old burning bush, which are definitely shrubs, right? Until you prune them into a tree form. So what is the meatball on the right, left? Anybody have a Serbian spruce in their yard? Or a Colorado blue? Well, this is the dwarf version. Is that a tree? Not so much, right? Now, is it branched from the base? Kind of, sort of. It's branched at the ground, but it certainly isn't what we think of as a tree, right? And how about the one next to it? That's a weeping Norway spruce. So you have to be, this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, right, for what's a tree and what's a shrub. But somewhere way back, somebody said 15 feet and under is really not a tree. 15 feet and over is. Single stem or multi-stem trees, which can be good, bad, or ugly, depending on how they've been grown and how that attachment is for a multi-stem tree. And single stem shrubs, kind of, sort of, if you think of steak on a stick. A lot of our grafted, like the grafted, well, Colorado blue spruce, again, on high standard or low standard. Okay, those are still shrubs, even though they're technically a tree in a round form. So now that you're totally confused, trees or shrubs? Holy buckets, what are those? Lindens. Now, anybody who has a linden in their landscape is unlikely to have one that looks like one of those black crows or dots you get at the movie, right? But they are truly lindens. They're a single stem, and they have been allowed to branch to the ground and then have been pruned into this strange shape. So here's another kind of funky thing. We all live in an urban jungle, right? Kind of. That's sort of how they describe the city. Urban jungle. Jungle is trees, and a jungle is a dense forest in a hot climate, and a location marked by an intense competition and struggle for survival. There's all sorts of, heaven forbid that we would do something without referencing something online. Yes? Great, right? And urban, here's urban. So urban jungle, right? Related to or concerned with a city or a densely populated area. Yes. And that would be, Princeton can describe what urban is. Pretty urban, right? An awful lot of Lincoln, an awful lot of Omaha. Even smaller communities are beginning to do row house kinds of things, which doesn't leave much room for us, but we do it, right? Trees in town, trees in the urban jungle. So if you think to those two definitions, there isn't any reason why we can't have that dense forest in a hot climate in a place related to a city, which is the urban jungle. So when we talk about trees, this is what we're going to talk about. Putting trees in this kind of an environment. Now, what do you think about that picture? Beautiful? Is that trees or is that shrubs? Exactly. Yes is the right answer. Because it's trees, it's pines, which have limbed themselves up, so they're toothpick pines, with Cornus florida or flowering dogwood beneath them. So it's classic for the ways that we layer and use big trees, little trees, shrubs, ground covers in the environment. It's all layered. It's all the beautiful stuff. This still exists, not quite like this, but this is on Calvert Street between 40th and 37th. And it is still there. This picture is probably 10 years old. What do you think? Beautiful, yes? Trees or shrubs? Yes, all of them. Evergreen and deciduous and large and small, and differences in form and color. Now, for nature, of course, knows what she or he is doing at all times. Witness, we didn't get any snow and then we got a beautiful rain. Scotts Bluff got 14 inches twice when they really needed it. The poor South is being devastated. So she knows what she's doing, she's just not telling us. Now, the one thing that happens is if we try to choose trees and shrubs for exactly, I want you to bloom this week, and then I want you to bloom next week, and then I want all of you to overlap with your flowering. Not happening, right? Not happening. So you just have to go with it. You have to think, this is what I want to do, and then when and how it happens, I am going to enjoy it with trees and shrubs. Pure and simple, right? Because you have crabapples blooming with one of our very earliest of spireas, which is actually garland spirea, which is blooming right now. The crab apples are just about ready to pop. Okay? Trees, shrubs, doing what they're supposed to do. Some of you might recognize this, the 12th Street Mall. We call that building the radiator building because that's kind of what it looks like, right? Even though that's not right. But it's the classic canopy over edge definition, defining where you are looking and where you are moving. Now, this is not linear. I mean, obviously the street is linear, right? But the planting itself in this instance is not, or wasn't. I haven't been up there to look for a while. But it was more like this, back and forth, space moving in and out, which does a couple of things if you use trees and shrubs properly. It makes a long walk seem shorter because it's not all lined up all the way down. And there are open spaces and enclosed spaces and high spaces and low spaces. Make sense? Okay, so how do we use them? And this is before you choose them. So you got to figure out how you're going to use them before you go off to Home Depot and buy one. Pure and simple. It doesn't matter how cheap they are or how much you covet one because you saw it in flower someplace. Figure out what you want them to do. This is classic standard design stuff. Start with the people that are going to be using the space. And again, I want you to be thinking about the word timelessness as I'm talking as well. Over time, transcending generations. Your landscape is highly likely to change as you age and as pets come and go, children come and go, grandchildren come and go. Your interest changes. So it's, you know, start with you with this landscape before you choose. What are the functions you really need to have happen, and what do you really want to have happen? What is the darn growing environment? Where are you going to try to make them live? Okay? What is your preference for the style of the space? How are you going to manage it, or how is somebody else going to manage it? This is classic management season because everybody's in a toot to get everything all cleaned up and cut back, right? If they haven't already done it. And then we choose the plants. So it's the how to use before we actually choose. So what do you have? The inventory and the assessment of what do you have in terms of trees and shrubs in your landscape? What do you already have? My students right now are writing 2 management plans in spite of themselves. Let me just put it that way because they're all seniors and their brains checked out probably, I don't know, in January. One of the management plans is for Mendoza Park in Lincoln, and the other one is for the community orchard in South Sioux City. Both of which have pretty significant existing materials. Oh, and the one they're designing is Panhandle Panhandle Research and Extension Center in Scotts Bluff, which also has 30, 35-year-old plants. The first thing they have to do is figure out what they've got and what is its condition. Just, you know, independent of whether they love it or hate it, it's what's going on. Okay, you got to do that with the trees and shrubs in your landscape. It's a great year to do it because you might see some things show up that have not shown up before in terms of drought stress from 2 or 3 years ago. Insects, pests. We have, for backyard this week, typically I have to make up questions and I have to go out and take pictures. No, I've already shoved some of them off into next week already. So what if you've got an X? So what difference does it make? This is where you get into, does it contribute to how you want your space to function, how you live your life, how you want to manage it, and whether you like it. Whether you like it. You get to like it if it is yours, right? I don't have to. I don't live there. So this is an upright white spruce. It was planted a foot from, that happens to be the corner of my house. It was planted a foot from the corner of the garage. Don't ask me why. We've lived there 23 years. It's still there, a foot from the garage. Why? because it does this. It's an upright form. The upright form, the fastigiate branching, cantilevers, the snow goes like this. And it takes a whole year for it to, okay, let me get them back up again. And then we get another snowstorm. So there's at least one branch that's usually thinking, I can't remember how to stand up straight. Why? I know better, right? Why is it still there? I like something it does. I don't like it particularly. It's where the birds come in. The birds come in, they scout a little bit before they decide whether some marauding cat is going to get them before they get to the feeder. Pure and simple. It's that edge landing zone. So it stays. It stays. Okay, so what is your growing environment? And it is climate. And yes, indeed, climate change. Our zone has changed. We are zone 5B, 6A, not zone 4A, 4B now. Many of the things that we used to say, yes, you can try it, but you are going to lose it. We are now saying not only can you try it, but it will thrive. And watch out, it's going to go on my invasive species list. Okay? So you'll notice the word slope repeated like 116 times, right? Because the slope in your environment directly affects the sun, north facing, south facing, the wind, east facing, west facing, the moisture you're going to receive. You've probably all been in the situation where you just want to cuss because there goes that rain circling around and they got it and you didn't, and you live a block away, right? Okay, the soil itself, depending on the quality of your soil, it's either at the bottom of your slope or it's on the slope. Yes, so slope makes a big difference. Pests and pathogens, huge deal, and the management practices. Now, I hope to high heaven that none of you have a parking strip that looks like this with a tree that looks like that, because that is a former tree, even though it has not been removed just yet, right? That is not a great growing environment for anything other than probably prostrate knotweed, which is in bloom right now, or close. Okay, so existing trees to remain. The words to remain go all the way back to, do you want it or not? Does it do what you want to? Who has an ash? Who is going to treat it? I'm going to hope that they can't find mine because I'm in the middle of Lincoln, but I'm not going to treat mine either. Okay, but it's a sadness, isn't it? It's a sadness. So on your inventory, existing tree, not to remain, which means, are you thinking the way we want you to, which is what are you going to replace it with for somebody else at this point in your life? The big guys, if you do have existing trees that you want to keep, they are going to take everything they need before they're going to let anybody else have anything. So planting beneath, planting on the edges, planting in the zone of their roots is going to mean you have to take extra special precautions in terms of watching the watering and the fertility, because the roots of those big guys are going to go first, okay? And that is truly the case with it. You have to really pay attention. A lot of people replace multiple times and they kind of forget that part about you can get a half an inch or an inch of rain in Lincoln under the canopy of a big tree. That soil is bone dry between the roots and the canopy itself, okay? All right, beautiful, right? That's my backyard with existing trees. This one's, whoops, I always do that. This one's gone, no, that one's there. That one's there. The three this way are gone. So the whole backyard has completely changed. Actually, 4 in the backyard are gone. I'm gonna be anxious to see how much sun I have in the backyard. They were toothpick pines. So all of a sudden, the environment that my existing trees have and the things that I have planted that were under the shade of those old trees, whole different ballgame, which again, you need to be aware of that as you're looking at trees and shrubs. Okay, so here's what you want to do. So how you're going to use, so you're going to enframe or enclose your spaces. You're going to direct your focus attention either towards something or away, right? Something beautiful in the right spot, you're going to look at that, right? You're not going to look at the trash cans, okay? You want to create scale of space. So we as human beings, we either are comfortable in open spaces or we're comfortable in enclosed spaces. Usually somewhere in between. You want to guide the traffic. You want to provide a screen from something you don't want to see, or the wind, or a backdrop. Right now, the Hearts Project in Lincoln is going on. Well, you know, they're really cool as long as they're displayed against something that does not interfere with your ability to enjoy them, right? Modify the climate, absolutely. Shade, wind control, precip control if you want to hang out under a tree for a while. Multi-season interest, absolutely. No reason to have many things that don't provide more than one season of interest. Solve some sort of a problem. Hold a slope. Take up the moisture in a rain garden, those kinds of things. So here's what we think about. Does it make sense? Is it unified, or is it bitsies and pieces like a crazy quilt? Is there a rhythm or a flow to it, the way that it has actually been designed, thought about, and put together? Okay, and this is a classic example of simple trees, because what you're looking at is a line of swamp white oak. There are 5 on one side and there are 4 on the other. Very, very simple. Following the curve of the driveway up to the house. And then it gets complicated, a little bit more complicated. You're not really supposed to stop on the curve. You're supposed to go under this beautiful tree line drive up to the house on this one. So, most of you have heard me talk about this before. This is a little reminder before we talk trees and shrubs. Formal, informal, and natural are the styles that we talk about. The more formal, the more unforgiving, because this is living things. And they don't know that they're supposed to be matchy-matchy. Informal is more dynamic. There's more movement typically to an informal. Natural is the way nature paints, which is the best of the best if you like the style and it meets your needs. Formal, wouldn't you say? Tree-lined street, and the trees have actually been pruned into that form. And a formal space, most definitely. And unfortunately, management can turn something that is informal into what appears to be formal structurally. Gardener's garden, this is informal. This is not natural. This is not painting with plants. This is onesies and twosies, and this is the way I'm guessing that a lot of your gardens are. This is the backyard. So it's kind of an old picture. The interesting thing right here is about 3 times that size, just to give you a notion. And the natural. So when I say paint with plants, this is what I mean. Sweeps and masses. The sumac coming around the hill, going down like this. Plum, of course, the cedars that we're trying to get rid of, but those kinds of plants. Okay, scale. We talk about enclosing our spaces. So if we were standing in the middle of the stadium right now, the 20 of you and me, and I was giving this talk, even if I had on a really good sound system, you would feel minute, right? Overwhelmed. If we were in a space the size of your dining room, the 20 of you and me, you would feel overwhelmed. So enclosure, the walls, the ceiling, and the floor, using trees and shrubs is what makes our spaces feel comfortable for how we're going to use them. And it's distance to height. Who is from the West, High Plains? Nobody? Who's from east of here, forested? How far forested? You win. Routine? Iowegian, me too. See the rabbits. Really? Penican Ford, it really smelled good growing up, didn't it? So if you're from tree country coming to wide open space country, the sense of enclosure is completely different. It takes a lot of getting used to, doesn't it? And if you're from wide open space country like Scotts Bluff, we go to Scotts Bluff every spring break to talk. You know, you put one tree out there and they all go, oh my heavens, what is it? So, but a part of that is the way we think about enclosure. And then massing. Again, if you think about how nature paints, rarely do you see a singleton, right? It's a specific environment. And simplicity. You know, complex landscapes with billions and jillions of interesting, diverse plant material can still be very simple if they're massed together properly. Okay, you don't have to use 75 of the latest and greatest shrub rows, I hope. Okay, so we talk about dominance, and we talk about similarity, and we talk about contrast. So in the landscape, as in most things, if everything is dominant, nothing is dominant. It competes. Similarities are what allows us to get contrast. You may use another shrub that is yellow, but it's a bigger shrub. It's a finer texture. It's placed slightly differently. I'll give you a classic example because we'll go look at it, and it's Cornelian cherry dogwood, which is almost finished blooming, but there's still enough yellow. Maybe it's yellow twig dogwood, which hasn't even started to leaf out. So there's the yellow twig for the yellow forsythia. So you have a similarity of color going on, or a similarity of form. Maybe there are lots of vases, but they're different sizes or they're different textures. So everything isn't the same and everything isn't different, okay? So we don't want 100% of everybody being on top. It just doesn't work. Everything can't all be an incredible, beautiful specimen plant because you go like this. Okay, where am I going to look next? Where am I going to? And then you throw up. Pure and simple. Okay? All right. So focus and focal points. You focus attention toward the entrance, as an example. The entrance to a building, the entrance to your home, the gate into your backyard. Or you focus attention away. And again, it's how you choose and place those plants that will give you that focus. And the focus can be the same 365 days of the year if you use plants that are just kind of evergreen, right? Or it can change with the season. And all you've had to do is plant them in the first place, right? Spring bloom, summer flowers, fall color, winter fruit. You got it right there, right? Okay, so this is classic. Colorado blue spruce, it's blue and it's pointy, and our eyes go to blue pointy things. And then the red here has blue in it. So there's a little bit of that cool going on, and it is a different form. So there's contrast, but it's not a wad of contrast. So remember that lines, we start with lines. When you're a little kid, you learn, you take the marker and you do this. Color outside the lines, which we forget how to do because we beat it out of you. The lines create the form. Any form repeated creates a different form. So the repetition of a form creates something different, okay? The odd lines, if we have an odd line that doesn't make any sense and it's on the ground or it's a fence, there's a new fence on Van Dorn Street, brand new. It's one of those dog ear or, those slat fence things. Brand new, and I don't know why they did this. They cut the top of the fence to match the stones in this incredibly expensive stone wall. So you drive down Van Dorn, and the only thing you know what I'm talking about. It's like your eye goes like this. And that line cannot be fixed without hiding it. Pure and simple, okay? So these are catalpas. That's not what you think of with a catalpa tree, is it? They don't look like catalpas at all. It looks like kind of a mass of something with vertical trunks and that kind of a form. That's what happens when you repeat something. So any form, whether it's a round thing or a pointy thing or a square thing or a vase-shaped thing, can be any texture. We have a tendency as human beings to think that fine texture means small and usually rounded or vase. And big texture, big, bold texture means big. Well, we do have some shrubs and some trees, some shrubs that have very bold texture in small packages. Not many, but we do have some. This is actually the branching on black gum, Nyssa sylvatica. We have 2 black gums in the courtyard. It's not a widely used tree, but it should be if you get it from a good source. So every now and then I'm going to sprinkle it in. If you'd really like to get something different, here it is. Go big red, fall color. And it likes a bit of a wet condition. And it's got beautiful glossy foliage and interesting branches. So enclosure, again, we have the ground, the wall, and the floor planes, just like you do in a building. The distance height ratio that I referred to, a ratio of 1 to 1, so 4 feet across and 4 feet tall is a 1 to 1 ratio. It's like being in the urban canyon. Downtown Chicago, downtown Omaha, which is actually less than 1 to 1, where really the thing that is dominant is sort of the alley-like feeling of the space. The flip on that is 4 to 1, which is horizon. Human beings are comfortable somewhere between 1 and 4. That is where we're most comfortable, and most importantly, that is where space gets defined. If it's narrower than that, you're relating only to the buildings or the trees, the vertical lines or the shrubs. If it's wider than that, you're referring to infinity. And we tend not to spend time in those spaces. So lines on the ground, the floor is the first place we start. On the ground, it's change of texture. Change of texture can help figure out how a space works. Now, we don't have a lot of shrubs that are low, but we have some ground cover types of shrubs, some of those creeping forms that we can use. And obviously, the whole point with a change in texture on the ground is cover the ground in that spot, almost like you would pave it. So we'll look at a couple of examples when we go outside of things that shrubs that have ground cover-like tendencies. By the way, right now the lawns are painted blue, right? If you're unfortunate, you have henbit. If you're fortunate, you have scilla, which is actually, or you have grape hyacinths, one way or the other. Okay, so if you look at the line on the ground and then the forms associated with it here, here's the line on the ground, right? Clean. Here's the line of the wall. A rounded form with a finer texture, then a more upright oval form, which is a bold texture, and a darker green, right? And then you have fine, and this forms a mass, but the similarity is grass-like texture in a more bold sort of a manner, and certainly taller. Yes? Makes sense? Okay, so here's the deal. Low walls, which are 2 to 4 feet, define space, but they don't enclose it. This is where shrubs are just the best. You don't want a fence, or you do want a fence, but you'd rather enhance it with shrubs. The tricky thing is we don't have a lot of shrubs that'll stay between 2 and 4 feet tall without a good pair of pruning shears. So that's part of the issue, but here's 4 feet. So, you know, you can still see over, but it's your space, not somebody else's, okay? They allow that visual access to occur, and yet it defines the spaces differently. The high walls are 6 feet plus. So you can use shrubs, again, remember 15 feet and under, or you can use low canopied trees, which most of our ornamental trees by specification are low canopy, okay? And they're backdrops again, they're screens. You get a sense of mystery if something is so high and so dense you can't see what's on the other side. Now that can be excellent, and it can also be overwhelming and frightening. These are Morton privet, which is one of the vertical, all by itself, no pruning shears. And they're on the west side of our building, and they've been there for years. What happened to the 4 to 6 footers? The tweens, the in-betweeners. It's line of sight, which is 5 feet. That 4 to 6 is a really uncomfortable spot to stop a line, So if you think about that, fences in our neighborhoods, and I'm going to use fences as opposed to shrubs, we stop there at 5 to 6 feet, right? Exactly at the point where you under, you over, under, over, under, over. And it doesn't screen out what you want it to anyway. So you're better off to define space like this, enclose it like this, and then canopy with the trees overhead, okay? All right, let's see. So, use of different forms in trees and shrubs. This is the beetle center on the west side. Most of this is actually still there. So, big old sea green juniper, which if you leave them alone, they take about a 10-foot space, and they have a 45-degree branching angle, and they're higher in the middle. They're pretty cool if you leave them alone, all right? Taylor juniper, as vertical as it gets. So there's the similarity. This is a bur oak. Over time, the idea being, of course, that that will canopy over the space, which then means these have to change because they're not shade tolerant. But it is the west side of the building, so they're going to get a different kind of a sun anyway. And then the repetition of the oaks, and this is actually one of those ground cover shrubs we're going to talk about. Okay, what do you think? It's not bad for a geriatric landscape because it's as old as the beetle center is. Okay, then we have things for the decoration that are shrubs and trees. I have a student who actually works for Landscape Services. She's great. Her husband also is one of the owners of Zipline. So she's a good person to know. But she uses the word, let's see, what does she call it? It's not lawn art. I immediately forgot what it is. I'll think of it. For things that are placed, that are inappropriate for where they belong. And you can do that with shrubs if every single one of them is too much of a specimen, okay? So focal, unique, you really need to keep living things that you're going to use as a piece of artwork in the best possible condition. Otherwise, they don't look like, it's like having a piece of art that all of a sudden needs a paint job. That's really what it's like. Okay, so now we get to how to choose. Some of you have read this before. I'm going to use it forever until I die. So read that. Am I right? Sure I am. But you're all master gardeners. You know better. You can't have it all. Even silk needs dusting, right? Okay. What do you think? Now, what in the world do you suppose happened here? Nature she doesn't read the book. She doesn't know that the orange flowering quince is not supposed to bloom at the same time as the forsythia as the dead bud, right? It's quite colorful, and bang, it's gone. So if you pick apart, we all tend to pick by color. Don't do that because it's so fleeting to begin with, and if it overlaps, like I said at the start, you're likely to get this. Right now we have a little bit of this going on. The red buds haven't started. The magnolias are just breaking, which is really unusual. The white ones have already finished, and they're usually after the pink. And they bloomed and bloomed and bloomed, and we would have sworn they had all frozen off. And they didn't. And the flowering dogwoods haven't started, and the red buds haven't started, and the forsythia is finished. It's just like, okay. And the quince is in full speed ahead on the quince. Okay, so we start with hardiness. It ought to live here. Let's just start with that, right? And do not rely on what the tag tells you, because the tags have come from wherever the supplier has bought the plants, and most of the box stores buy all their plants from exactly the same wholesalers, and they all say zone 4 or 5. And there are blueberries for sale right now that wouldn't even begin to fruit in Lincoln, Nebraska. But they're zone 4 or 5, so be careful. Plant form and size. The form and the size is the next thing. Remember, they don't read the books. They don't know how big they're supposed to get. So rely to some extent on that. Texture and textural change Seasonal interest, which you can interpret as the word color with trees and shrubs, kind of, sort of. The management requirements and the availability and the source of those plants. They might be available, but are they available from a decent source? Because if they're not grown properly. Okay? Prettiful? Seasonal change? Color? Pretty darn nice. That's my next door neighbor's yard. But it's years ago and there's a different neighbor there. And it looks different now because she has managed it differently. Okay, knowing what it wants to be if it's a tree, and this goes to management, should give you a clue on whether you want it or not. This is an autumn blaze maple. They are a hybrid between silver and red. They are very fast growing, which is why they are so frequently on sale for very little money at the end of the season. When I teach this to my students, I refer to these as stretch marks, because that is exactly what they are. They grow so fast that they stretch their bark like that. They also tend to come in when they are young with multiple branches all arising from the same spot on the trunk, which is also an issue with really good maples. So if you don't manage them when they are young, you end up with this, and sooner or later you're going to end up with no tree. Okay. Management requirements. This is what honey locust does if you're not paying attention, right? Which is either thorns or seeds or both, or suckers, and then the suckers come up with thorns on them. So this all goes to choose for what it's going to throw at you. Suckers, root suckers. So classic flowering crabapple, they sucker if there is incompatibility with the graft union or if there's been damage to the root stock during the transport or planting. Okay, and some are supposed to sucker. This is also a crabapple. This is Sargent crabapple, which is the shrub form, which is truly a shrub. It is spectacular. I don't know why everybody doesn't own one, because it blooms pure white. It has tiny little fruit. It's a little bit of an alternate bloomer, but you can see the old stems. I've over time started cutting out the old stems to renew it. Sweetly scented. Everything about it says crabapple except the fact that it's supposed to sucker. So you have to know what it is supposed to do if you're going to buy a tree or a shrub, because otherwise you're going to have to prune it. And if you buy a crabapple, you're going to have to prune it every year, unless you buy a Sargent. You're close. You gave him a promotion. A Sargent crabapple. This is actually my students at Bryan years ago trying to prune the red jade crabapples, which are a weeping form that are in a narrow spot. Pest susceptibility. That's another thing that you should be aware of when you are selecting trees and shrubs. Now, just because it is susceptible doesn't mean it's going to get it. Just because it's resistant doesn't mean it won't. And again, we are seeing things occurring here that have all of us saying, we've never seen that before. We have a question about golden rain tree bug. I didn't even know they existed. It's a huge pest in Colorado. We got somebody in Lincoln has it. Okay, this is bullet galls. This is bullet galls on oak. Never bullet galls, as in bullet. We've never seen it in Lincoln until about 5 years ago. And now you pretty much can't walk down the street without usually the burr or the white oak family more than the red oak, all over the twiggage.
What is it?
It's a gall, and what happens is the gall insect, it's like if you get a sliver and you form a cyst around it. That's exactly what happens with it. We'll probably see some out on campus. And then, of course, this Japanese beetle. Japanese beetle, 300 species. Now, there are some that are more susceptible. Linden's happens to be one of them, and there are some that are less. But again, you have to tie what you select to how you intend to manage it. Are you going to live with bullet galls? Are you going to pick them off when they're young? Are you going to spray? Are you going to trap? Are you going to turn your head and walk away? Okay, remember this, your ash is what? Grass. That's white ash and green, you know, and they were planted because they were not susceptible. Oops. So you also have to plan for access to get the darn things out and down, because if you don't, I mean, they do have a lifespan, and you're either going to have to hope you sell the house first, so somebody else has to cut it down, or you're going to have to pay for it to get it in. There's a guy in Lincoln who has a spider lift, which is just amazing and tiny and little, and allows him to get in with equipment to prune rather than have to come in and climb or try to devastate your backyard. Anybody live in the line clearing part of town, or right now? In my part of town, the chippers are running full speed. But you got to figure out how to get a stump 36 inches across out of your yard if it's in the back. Okay. Management, do you want to do this? You can, but you have to, again, it goes back to what you want to do with your trees and shrubs. This is a lovely little garden, by the way, in Kansas City. Selection. Okay, so we start with good roots. The roots form the shoots. Size of trees and shrubs by specification. So by law, by national specification, ANSI standards, Z60.1, is why a crabapple is supposed to look like X when you buy it. And that's based on how big is it supposed to be, both root mass, number of branches or canes if it's a shrub, number of branches and caliper if it's a tree, in relationship to the size of its ball. If it is not that, it technically does not meet specifications, which means that you can buy it if you want, but you may be getting something that is a little root ball with a big top. A big top on a little root mass is probably not going to survive. Okay, and the season. When are you going to buy it? So again, you know, we're now down to how you choose. When are you going to buy what and plant it? Is this the perfect time to purchase and plant trees and shrubs? Oh, it's pretty good. It's pretty good right now, right quick. Okay, because it's cool. It's supposed to be wet. It's not high humidity, hot nights, which is bad in this part of the state. It's not droughty yet. What's also a good time? But not for all of them, because the ones that are on the edge of the zone or suffertescent or a little tricky, we don't want to plant in the fall because they need to reestablish, and some of them will not do that. Okay. Okay, so balled and burlapped, you can still buy trees and shrubs balled and burlapped. It is the old method and one of the ones that is still considered the best, but you have to buy them from somebody who knows how to ball and burlap. And it's kind of a dying art because it's very labor intensive. Okay, and it's heavy. You're moving a lot of soil with the balled and the burlap plant. Now, what you will see in a lot of suppliers is balled and burlapped in a container. That is to be able to transport if they are good. It's not supposed to be to sell you a containerized shrub that's balled and burlap. Treated burlap, absolutely not. Treated twine, absolutely not. Remove as much of the basket as you can. Remove that burlap, absolutely. And for heaven's sakes, remove the twine. Because if you don't, what you get is this, which is the ball. This is actually the soil line, which is an issue, and that is good old baling twine, which anybody who ever works with baling twine, you got it forever, unless it goes through the mower, and then your mower is toast. Okay, so a balled and burlap tree is also heavy. You get it in the hole, and you need to make sure it is standing upright, and you get that basket off if you possibly can, or at least cut to get that off. Or you buy root maker, root trapper, which is a newer art and growing in popularity and availability. And if you can get smaller trees grown in root maker system, they start from the beginning as a seedling in this particular system, all of which encourages the right kind of root production. It's air pruning is really what it is. And you can end up with a fabulous tree in this system. You can also end up with bad root systems if the provider doesn't transplant, doesn't bump them up. So in any situation buying a tree and shrub, you can end up with a crummy root ball. Now, there will be people who will tell you they can turn any crummy root system tree or shrub into a good one with the right tender loving. Sure, give it a shot. I'd rather buy a good one to start with. Okay, now you can also get too deep in the container in a good root production, depending on where it comes from. And deep in the container is the death knell in our clay soils. Deep in the container or deep in the hole. My students were out pruning the hydrangeas this afternoon, and I said, all right, it's a really good time to look and see what's going on at the base of the plant as long as you're up there pruning the top. One of them was a little bit not doing as well. Dug down, and one said, well, this plant sunk. And it did. It was sitting in about this much lower than the rest of them, even though it was a brand new plant, which means it's too wet in that condition. Now it's young enough, they just lifted it up and put some soil under it. But too deep in the container or too deep in the hole is one of the things that really is a challenge to plant material. Okay, so many choices. Trees, overstory are the shade trees, the big guys, cottonwoods, elms, oaks, ash, coffee tree. Understory would be under the over, right? Unders and overs for the basketball game, whoever won. Did somebody win the Buffett pool? I never heard. Nope, good, kind of. And understory are also considered the ornamental or the flowering trees, the smaller of the trees. They can be deciduous. We have evergreen trees. We talk about Colorado blue spruce as technically a tree, even though it's an evergreen, right? And we have either single stem, which is the more typical standard tree, or we have clump or multi-stem. Okay, this is an Adirondack crabapple, and it's supposed to be that shape. All right? Shrubs, so many more choices, because if I give you my shrub list and I give you my tree list, the tree list is like this, the shrub list is like that. Same thing. Now, we tend to think of shrubs as small, medium, and large. It's relative, because to me, something that is 3 feet tall is kind of medium because I'm short. But if I were 7 feet tall, something 3 feet tall might be small. But that's kind of how we tend to talk about them. Deciduous or evergreen. We also have broadleaf evergreen. We do not have in this climate any broadleaf evergreen trees. We don't. They just won't live here. Spreading or suckering is one of the things you need to think about in shrubs, and especially those shrubs that are pushing that 15-foot I'm a shrub, I'm a tree line. The colonizers, because in their genes, they want to spread. If you try to keep them from spreading, you have just committed yourself to the kind of management you don't want to have to do all the time. Here's the forms that we talk about. Classic vase, oval, a pyramid. So something that is a little pointy on the top and a little wider on the bottom. Ascending. So when we use the word ascending branching habit, we're like touchdown. Here we go. We're like this, ascending branches, as opposed to a rounded form or upright, which is really, it's like, whoa, I'm upright, okay? Weeping, creeping, which is the lower form, which really ties into shrubs. Horizontal, we have especially some smaller trees and some shrubs that have a horizontal habit, a beautiful sort of a stacked habit. And then the irregular, the ones that just like, okay, fine, I'm going to do this. And those are the ones that really work less well in a formal landscape unless they're the focal point, because everything else is clipped and tidy and they're the one that's like, I'm going to be way cool. Okay? So those are trees. Those are actually English oaks. The big English oak is like a big English oak. So a part of the breeding and the grafting of trees, we have turned oaks into sentinels as opposed to overstory trees. Sumac, tiger eye sumac, is that a tree or shrub? Well, it looks like a tree, doesn't it? A little dinky, like a Dr. Seuss tree in that color, but it's technically a suckering shrub. Yes? Okay, so the management piece, we're going to go outside here in just a minute. So reap what you sow, which means if you buy it and you don't know what it's going to do, you're going to get to reap the benefits as you weep and pull them all out of your landscape, or try to not impale yourself on the thorns you didn't know the plant had. Plant properly, right season, right depth, from right supplier, mulch, water, fertilize, stake, prune. Those are all really important things. Good intentions with trees and shrubs start with really good marketing, which is, and again, the marketing trends and what we buy is based on what whoever created it and has good marketing sells us and tries to convince us that we want. The wrong space. There's a house behind that tree. The wrong planting, the depth, the spacing, the environment, all the way back to that environment. I don't care how badly you want a flowering dogwood in South Lincoln on the south side of your house in construction soils, you cannot have one. You can go buy one, but you probably cannot have one, and that's different, okay? The management itself, good intentions, poor execution, how you prune, when you prune, how you stake, and if you stake, and what you do about that stake in enough time to make sure that staking method itself doesn't damage the new tree you just planted. So target practice is poor execution. And by that, I mean your mower or your string trimmer, or you have put something in the wrong spot and you just can't help it. The bumper of the truck hits it every single time you drive by. Or it didn't read the book and you planted it too close to the edge of the driveway and it got a little wider than you wanted it to, okay? Construction practices, well, let's just look at across the street. That is going to be such a great environment to have to restore so we can get something to grow in there. Anger management. It's just a really good day to go out there with your pruning saw, right? Or not. And spring cleaning and cleanup, which again, I referenced this earlier, but right now, every piece of equipment that'll do something fast is on full tilt in the city of Lincoln. And those are terrible practices for long-term tree and shrub management. So pruning, we're also going to talk. Manage for what you've done. These are U's. These are Hicks U's. Now, once you prune something that doesn't want to be pruned into a form like that, can you get it to grow out of it? You can, but it takes a lot of patience, and it takes not just all of a sudden stopping. Right. I mean, if you just stop, it's like, holy buckets. What'd that turn into? Some things you cannot allow to grow out of how they've been pruned. And again, if you have committed to something like this, if this is your style, just know that you're committed to it, because it will not grow out of it. These will not grow out of it. Okay, so pruning basics, we're going to cover a little bit of that. And again, I'm going to just touch the surface. We're going to go outside and talk more about it. Dormancy or summer. We do have summer pruning. Dormancy is best when your tools are sharp and you have the time, is good. But we don't prune during leaf on and leaf off, which is right now for some things and almost now for a lot of other things. If we do prune during leaf on in the spring, remember those trees and shrubs are putting their resources into pushing their new growth, putting on their flowers, putting on their fruit. A pruning wound requires those resources to go to compartmentalizing the wound, okay? Leaf off, they're supposed to be shutting down. Carbs or carbohydrates are supposed to be going down to the root system. A pruning wound, same thing. They're going to be putting resources into managing the wound. And if we have a fall like we had last year, pushing new buds, new growth into November, which then goes, oh my gosh, it just dropped 60 degrees overnight. And then you're in trouble, okay? Branch diameter, ideal branch diameter for pruning trees is less than 1 inch. Less than 1 inch. That's your thumb joint. So, and it's almost impossible, really. If you have a complicated landscape or a lot of trees, it's almost impossible to be able to prune effectively at 1 inch or less. But the smaller the cut, the less the negative effect on the plant. Okay, and you must follow bark ridge and collar on trees. If you cut into the ridge, you cut into the collar, you have now cut into the portion of the tree where the growth hormones exist that will allow that pruning wound to compartmentalize. And if it cannot compartmentalize a wound, that is where the insect pests come in and the diseases. Okay? Bloom time is the important one for shrubs. So the UNL Gardens website Facebook page had a thing on pruning lilacs with the flack collection. It was a long paragraph. It was pretty well written, except for the part that, remember that people only read one sentence? And prune to the ground, or prune at 18 inches, or do the caning out of a third, which is ideal. But the don't do it until after it flowers was a little later in the paragraph. And people who prune the lilacs now, which several people said they had already done, means they've lost the flowering. You know, you prune forsythia in March or in February, you lose the flowers. So is it blooming on current year's wood or old wood is really important. Can you renew? And the renewal pruning of shrubs, we don't renewal prune trees. The renewal pruning of shrubs means you take 1/3 of the old canes every year for 3 years, and you reduce the top by about 1/3 for 3 years. The idea being you're renewing the ability of that plant to sucker from the base or to put on new shoots from the base. You can do that with an awful lot, but not all. And you can't do it with ones that don't want to regenerate from the base or that are ancient. Really doesn't work. Rejuvenation, you're cutting the whole darn thing down to about 18 inches, crossing your fingers and hoping it comes back. And that is, again, a pruning technique that works with many of our shrubs, but you have to know which ones. Then, of course, hedging or shearing. Which ones will tolerate it? None of them really like it, but some of them will tolerate it. Forsythia, there's a fire hydrant behind that. So your eye goes right to what's supposed to be screened. That is what forsythia wants to be. So, you know, it's up to you because it's your shrub. But if you want something to look like this, buy something that is going to grow like that. Good luck. Okay, so the lines, we want to establish strong edges. I'm just going to flip through a pile of images here before we go outside. You want to choose shrubs that are going to stay put on their side of the line or stray over that line. Same thing with trees. You want to change the line over time instead of changing the plant. So again, this is a little bitty plant, right? And if this is the edge of my sidewalk, or I got 18 inches, right? So next year I've got, and then the pruning shears come out. Or I plant it over here knowing it's going to spread to here, and I still have this line. That's what you want to try to do, okay? All right, and you got to remember getting the mower in and out. Our neighbor just poured a new apron on his driveway. What he didn't accommodate is the width of the radius for the garbage truck that comes up his driveway. So the edge of his driveway is fine, but the landscape on both sides is already smashed. And he just poured it last week. Strong lines, good mass, trees and shrubs all together, do you think? Would you go down that path? You bet you would, right? Pretty way cool. And you'll notice the line is simple. That's mondo grass. This is not here. That's boxwood. It's kind of pruned, but not all. Here's those understory trees or large shrubs. Background is bigger stuff, so it's layered up. How about this one? Very early spring, obviously. Big old tree form, kind of a vase, a little more upright, rounded form, stake on a stick, right? Color right here, magnolia, that's a little pixelated, but what do you think? That kind of works? How about this? Now that is a New Dawn rose that was 40 feet long. Spectacular rose. The thing your eye focuses on is what? The two U's. You focus on the U's. If they were pruned a little less tightly, then you'd simply have the mass and the rose behind it. So again, this ties what you buy and plant to the way you manage it. Aging gracefully. So look at the forms. I use this slide in every single presentation because you've got form, rounded form, oval form, differences in height, differences in density, differences in texture. In the summer months, you don't have a whole lot of change. You just have leaves on the trees and the shrubs because this is not a place with color. But it could be, couldn't it? Change over time. Think about your geriatric landscape. These pines are toothpick pines, planted close together, and now they should be gone. They should be gone. Textural differences with shrubs in particular, just because they're green doesn't mean that they have to match. So you have the bolder texture of a little mugo and the finer texture of a juniper and the hardness of the stone or the rock in this one. Enframement. That's actually a serviceberry, multi-stem serviceberry that is, this is actually the breezeway. I'm standing in the breezeway. Or I'm sorry, this is the front. So this is actually an old amber maple at the front door on this one. But you could use any small tree that has that kind of a branching structure. The canopy is really more about right here than it is way up. So it suggests entrance. What do you think? Where's the front door? That Aronia did not read the book. It is no longer living there. But it took about 10 years worth of them getting tired of pruning it back every single year before they finally decided to rip it out. But again, if you look, you've got a decent line, big old tree, big old tree. It's just these guys that were, and a butterfly bush, same thing. It's like one of the big ones, forgot, too big. How about here? Sense of enclosure, sense of space, a combination of trees and shrubs, not a lot of trees, a fair number of shrubs, rounded form, rounded form, rounded form, difference in size. That's where some of your similarity comes in. How about this one? If you had to guess, would you guess this is the backyard or the front yard with the two U's that are pruned tightly? You should guess that because it is. So big old toothpick pines with new pines beneath and behind. So there's that fine texture coming in. The U's, big old hostas in this case, and I know I'm talking only about trees and shrubs, but how many of you only have trees and shrubs? Exactly. Where is this? It's on East Campus. Doesn't look like that quite anymore because landscapes age and the environment for those azaleas has changed. So they are not quite as happy as they were. They're in too much sun. They don't have quite as much protection. But if you think about combining a big overstory tree and a sliver of lawn, right? And a shrub, in this case, a mass of the same shrub in different colors that is in your face for 10 days or 2 weeks, and then it's quiet and something else takes over. This doesn't have to be on campus. This could be yours. Buy the right azaleas. Do not buy the ones that froze off at the box stores. They don't want to live here. How about this? What do you think? It's a big old oak. Big old oak. Beautiful old oak. Big masses. This is up on city campus with the De Souvero sculpture. Lots of different plants in mass used as a backdrop for open space for the turf on that one. Woods Park, the tree line, right? Swamp white oaks, a little bigger than that now, but still there. And that's the difference. That's trees used en masse in a line as opposed to trees combined with shrubs. Yeah, the kite-eating tree. Yeah, I just had to take that picture when there was a kite in that tree. Now, unfortunately, an awful lot of this generation, it's like, what? The kite-eating tree, what? Oh, come on, read the Snoopy comics. Cut me a break here. But yeah, I mean, and again, that is a different way to define space, right? With the trunks of those trees. Very simple. You mow around the trees, you don't have anything else to deal with. Urban environment and a line of shrubs, in this case shrub roses, with a line of trees, in this case actually some of the new elms. That's mine, you've already seen it. Cottonwoods in a very small space with very large shrubs, but smaller ones as you approach the entrance. So a sidewalk path, you know, street trees in a city are just really essential. It's too bad we have so many streets that won't accommodate them anymore. And we have too many internet providers that are digging up the spaces. Okay, we're gonna stop there because I'm going into what? And we're gonna go outside and then we'll come back in because it'll get dark and we'll go over some of the whats. And I don't know when Terry says you can get up and stretch and take a break and pee and get like treats and things, but I'm guessing now would be a good time. And then we are gonna go outside if that's all right. Okay. Oh yeah, usually. All right, so what I'm gonna do now, and I don't care if we get through all this, I just randomly started picking out plants I wanted to talk about. Trees and shrubs. There are lists of what to replace your ash with. The Arboretum has a list. There are many plants on this that we do not agree with, but they're plants. What I like and what you like are not the same thing. We're good? Part of the disagreement we have with some of the plants on the list has more to do with giving people enough information. Let me give you an example. We want diversity, absolutely. I mean, again, I keep saying when I was landscape architect, it was highly unusual for me to do more than about 7 of anything in one spot, which is part of the reason it looked a little fruit basket upsetty, except that then there was repetition of those colonies of plants. We want great diversity, but when you have to tell people, all right, yes, a northern pecan is a really excellent tree to try as a replacement for, in what environment? There's one in Scotts Bluff. So you have to give people these are the conditions they need if you're going to try this tree. Availability, as I said before, there's no sense in whetting the appetite of people for something they can't have. Siberian elm is on the list for windbreaks in the West as a possible tree. Pears are still on the list. So be careful about anybody's list, including ours, because of a couple of things. When I make a list of plants, I always forget something. And when I make a list of plants, I almost always forget to say something about it that would help you grow it better, okay? So if you like something or you think, well, geez Louise, will that grow here? Could I try that as a replacement for? as an addition to, in combination with something else. If you don't think you have enough information or you question that information, ask. Send us a question, send Backyard Farmer an email. We're now back in the mode of trying to answer as many as we possibly can off air, by email if we don't get to them all on air. But I would far rather have somebody, I'd far rather tell you, I'm sorry, you cannot have that weeping white pine that you absolutely love because you're a southwest facing slope in full sun in construction soil in a wet spot. Don't waste your money. Okay, so let's start, and some are native and some are not, because you know what? There are not a whole lot of native shrubs here, and there are not a whole lot of native trees here. But the good adapted, as long as we understand it, and something that is native can also be invasive, a la cedars. Technically, we cannot call them an invasive plant by definition because they're native to this. They're native. But are they the worst thug in the world right now in Nebraska? Absolutely. Same, you know, so just because it's a pear that is not from here and becomes invasive doesn't mean that our natives can't too. Yes?
10 words or less. How do you get this?
So the question is, how do you get rid of cedars? One of our great professors here is doing his research on that. The best way to get rid of cedars is burn them.
Without cutting them down, just burn.
How big are they?
Oh, they're probably a couple that are halfway up to the ceiling and some that are just down there.
Yeah, the mow off will work if you mow them, cut and stump treat. They are incredibly flammable, which is one of the issues with them, but burning is really the best way to control cedars. Yes?
The NRD actually helps support and bring close to control burn. Most of what I talked about.
Yes. Yes.
The CRP ground and stuff like that. Having a new control burn on the CRP ground and early, late winter, early spring, that seed was extremely dry.
Right.
But you also have prairie grass all around the cedars.
Which is perfect for the cedar, perfect for the prairie.
Not good for the bird.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. With a control.
Yeah. Yeah. Control being the operative word. Yeah. 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 So, I mean, it's going to take a huge concerted effort on the cedars.
NRCS is actually paid, even if you're a rural person farmer, they pay to take out, they'll go ahead and say that they got a cedar infestation on that. And because I've had it on several of our packs, where they will pay a certain amount, 28 acres of infected. And the farmer goes in, takes them all out, and takes the cost of the plant.
Mm-hmm.
I'm rural, but they
Mm-hmm. Cattle won't graze them, horses won't eat them. You know, at least the cedar that we have is not the same as the southern one, which actually, if you cut it, it will regenerate. So, yeah. Okay, on that note, tulip tree. Tulip tree or tulip poplar or yellow poplar, not native. We have a couple on campus, fast growing, gorgeous, beautiful form, flowers with a tulip, flowers with a tulip-like flower in June-ish. The interesting thing about it is Heather Byers at Great Plains in Weston. Heather has begun growing tulip tree. She specializes, she does only trees, but she has been growing tulip tree in the number 15 root maker because it is such a beautiful, good tree for especially the eastern part of the state. Big, upright, not much bothers it. It's a little bit soft, not like a silver maple, but it's certainly not an oak. It's considered in the South a little bit more of a junk tree, but so is sweet gum. So are a lot of the things that, you know, we can grow one or two and they're pests down there. Tulip tree is worth a try if you need a big tree replacement. Here we're probably, well, the biggest one in Lincoln that I'm familiar with is on 33rd Street at about RST in a front yard of a house that's one of the 3 stories with the peak, and it's above the peak. So they're pretty big. They're considered fast. Yeah. So you're going to get a fast growth rate out of them. The one on campus in the Arboretum by the bridge is about like this, by the parking lot. And it's, I mean, you can see it if you just drive on the east side of the Arboretum and stop at the little old bridge. It's right there, and it's labeled. And it's probably 20 years old. So a good, fast enough growth rate without being an autumn blaze maple. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Is there a way to rate trees in terms of likelihood of breaking when, for example, when you have Halloween, like we did?
The 97 snowstorm.
Maples are the worst.
Right. So the soft maples are the worst. Autumn blaze is the worst. The faster the growth of a tree, the weaker the wood. So in terms of weakness, autumn blaze maple and silver are considered pretty weak. Now, silver can be a decent tree if you manage it when it's young. And we have some monster, I mean, I grew up with silver maples in Iowa, you know, around the way with the sugars, and if you go west, the maple you grow is sugar or silver until you get all the way west, and then you start mountain maple. Silver is considered fast. Anything that is in the poplar family, like cottonwood, is considered weak. Yellow poplar, which is tulip tree, is kind of on that weak but not as weak. Willows, anybody who grows a willow knows they're very weak. Oaks are the strongest of the strong. The hard maples, like sugar, are the maple floors of basketball. Elms are considered pretty strong, but there's a cautionary note on the new elms, which is they're not really performing the way we would like them to. So, if that helps. Okay, oaks. Give me an oak. I forgot to take you up to show you the bullet galls. But white oak, we can grow beautifully in this part of the state. It's slower. It also tends to hold its leaves. It does not senesce. So this time of year, you've got dead leaves hanging in the oak. Now, to my way of thinking, any tree like that bitternut hickory we looked at, or the little catalpa I didn't mention, anything that does not leaf out early is likely native, or it's so well adapted, it knows that spring is not here yet. And you don't get the damage to the buds. White oak is great. Red oak is good. Red oak is rounded. White oak is more upright. Swamp white oak tends to be overplanted because it will take construction soils. And those are the oaks of Woods Park. Yes? There's Burr, there's black, there's English, there's white. So there's a mix in there. Yeah. Burr is, of course, probably the slowest of our big oaks. But if you plant an oak for somebody else, and if you get one in the root maker system, Heather can get 5 feet of growth out of an oak in a single year. Now that's pretty darn fast, but they're still strong because they have a decent root system. Okay. It's actually the way she starts the root system. Mm-hmm. It's Carl Whitcomb's, it's called Root Trapper, Root Maker System. It's the only one that's actually been scientifically vetted. It's been around about 20 years. Todd Fowler in York carries a lot of plants in it. Finkeys are beginning to. I haven't been to Campbell's lately to see whether they're starting to. But the whole point is you start with a seedling in this root production method, which is air pruning. And then you move them up and you move them up. And an oak comes out of that bag or that system with a really good fibrous root system. as opposed to kind of the single onesie twosie roots that you get out of an oak if it's in a different situation. And they don't circle. Now they can circle, like I said, if they're in that system too far. The Arboretum, Bob is growing a lot of things in the root production method as well. Not everything yet, nobody is, okay? So we had the pin oak discussion. Pin oaks were overplanted. They are one of the fastest and the weakest of the oaks, unfortunately. And most of them in Lincoln their demise is near, pretty much. Burr is really, really strong. Chinkapin is native. Chestnut is another great oak. Buckley oak, there's some around. We don't know a lot about them yet, but we have some. Gamble oak, we can grow them here, but they want to live in the West. Okay. Sweet gum, considered a junk tree in the South, but they are 100% hardy here now. And this is moraine, which is actually a northern selection. And the thing people object to, of course, is the gumballs. Well, I think they're great. Now, I don't want to step on them in my bare feet, but beautiful star-shaped foliage. The fall color on them can range, this is not a good picture of it, but it ranges from gold to burgundy to almost black purple. Moraine is both more upright and a northern selection. Okay. Silver linden. Now, lindens, again, are a treasured food of Japanese beetles. However, they're also the bee tree. And silver linden is not nearly as well known or as widely planted. It is spectacular. We have, and you're looking at actually the one on East Campus over by the gazebo. So east of the dairy store, it looks like a giant silver gumdrop. They've allowed it to branch to the ground. It has not been pruned properly. And one of the issues with lindens is they tend to have what's called codominant stems when they're young. If you don't correct that, then that becomes a weak point. So unfortunately, this one has a lot of weakness to it. But there are several, I'm just shocked. I drive around Lincoln when the wind's blowing and you can see the silver lindens. Piedmont, there's some big, beautiful ones in Piedmont, because what you see is truly as silver as that slide on the backside. We have the one on campus called Sterling Silver, but they are, again, a really good choice. And lindens are shade tolerant. So although they're going to stretch in the shade, but they're not going to lean. And the real problem with oaks in the shade is the oaks are going to lean to the sun. The lindens are just going to stretch. I've seen silver lindens for sale, so I think they're available. So here's chestnut and chinkapin oak, difference in form. Catalpa, I really like catalpas. Tropical, native. The complaint people have given is that it looks, it's messy when they drop their flowers. Well, for heaven's sakes, yeah.
No one calls them that, but
they call them the bean tree. Exactly, they call them the bean tree. And you talk about a tree, and here we're talking upright, irregular. There is no such thing as a catalpa that's going to behave itself. Pure and simple. They're fast growing, but they're very tough. The oldest ones on campus, the south side of Architecture Hall, undergoing all of the construction over all these years. That tree is still there, and it's about 3/4 hollow. South side of the dairy store, there's one as well. So that's a tropical bold foliage choice. Hackberry, native. In some states, this is on the invasive watch list for good reason. So anybody who has hackberry knows that you don't have just one because the seedlings come up. It's shade tolerant. It's beloved by the birds. It's in the elm family. And I just noticed the hackberries this year are blooming their little heads off, which means we're probably going to have a good crop of seedlings. But since they are shade tolerant and they are relatively fast growing and they're a big, beautiful vase and they're tougher than a box of rocks, you can put them in a spot, and once you get them established, you set it and forget it. Prairie Pride is the new cultivar that is selected for a better habit when young. One of the real issues with the elms, and I don't have a lot of pictures of these, but especially the new elms, the hybrid elms, if you do not manage them when they are young, they're almost impossible to recreate a good structure. That would be Frontier and Accolade and Triumph and Homestead and Pioneer. And they're coming from the suppliers with dreadful structure. If you look on the south side of the campus recreation center, the elms in there are a substitute for the tree we wanted, which was a Zelkova, which is also in the elm family. We did some pruning on them with my class, and we couldn't even come close to recreating good structure in those trees. So, but this is the old hackberry down at the old Fed building. And it, again, has survived everything they've thrown at it, including, you know, the construction of the new park and the whole 9 yards. Sycamores. Now, I happen to be a true fan of sycamore or plane tree. It's native. There are a number of new cultivars of sycamore. It is a floodplain tree, but it also withstands pollution and street tree conditions. Massive structural branches. So the scaffold branches are few and cantilevered and beautiful. It is susceptible to anthracnose in a cool, wet spring. However, Heather Byers has actually discovered one in Omaha and propagated it, and it is anthracnose free, even in the kinds of weather conditions that we have had. Morton Arboretum has developed a hybrid with the London plane tree and our native called Exclamation. And it is this beautiful structure. So think about a pyramid like this in youth, smaller foliage, much more uniform, and relatively fast growing, but a very tough tree. Big, these are big guys. Sugar maple. We are truly in sugar maple country. Table Rock is one that was discovered along the railroad tracks in Table Rock, Nebraska. It's very hard to propagate. Unfortunately, the fall color is what you see, which is absolutely incredible and spectacular. They're also shade tolerant. And so they'll stretch and be vertical and beautiful and oval, but not lean. The maples are all surface rooted. So you need to be aware that as those roots spread, whatever you're growing beneath them is not going to be happy. Shantung and State Street are a couple of other maples that are on the list. Shantung is a little bit more delicate. It's sort of like a Japanese maple on steroids. And State Street looks a great deal like a sugar maple that has put on a lot of muscle. We have a good State Street in the courtyard. Morton Arboretum developed the one called State Street. And usually if Morton develops something, it is worthy of purchase. The one that's not on your list is red maple. And I don't care whether it's Frank's red or New Red or somebody's red, because red maple is being overplanted because we all want that red fall color. And in Minnesota, it is the straight species is already becoming invasive. So Kentucky coffee tree, great tree, also being overplanted, I must say, right now, because it is easy, tough. Espresso is the male. So you're not going to get the pods. I happen to like the pods. I like the fruits on pretty much everything except honey locust. But very uniform. This is the one that I said is bold in the winter and fine in the summer. If you do any damage to the root system, it will sucker and form a colony. So you dig it up and move it, you're going to have another coffee tree where you dug up the old one. Some of them get good fall color, some do not. They will stretch in the shade, but they won't lean. Let's see. So elms, ... And what you're looking at is Accolade that looks like some sort of a giant, I don't know what that looks like. And that was in the governor's backyard. Actually, that's the second one in the governor's backyard. And what did we see? About 6 feet of growth in a single season that year, which is, okay, wait a minute, knock it off. So, oh yeah, the squirrels stripped it completely. And we've seen that around Lincoln. The squirrels are going after these new elms like nobody's business. the cork tree that we saw over there and sticking up in the gazebo, I wish more people would use cork tree. Massive structural branches, very interesting bark, tough, tough, tough. It's got a compound leaf, a little bit reminiscent of an elm. It does fruit in the fall. Macho is the male, so you're not going to get any fruit, and it's, you know, a really macho man. But a little bit slower growing, but really, really tough. And again, I think it's worthy of a far more use than we're getting out of it. There was a great one at Iowa State. It had one low branch that you could actually climb on and sit on that was almost horizontal. And it was the tree probably spread easily from this wall past the coffee pot. Birch. River birch is not on my list. I know that most of you probably have one. This is white birch, yes. Oh, I'm not surprised. Mm-hmm. I'm not surprised because they're $40 a stem. $40 a stem. And I actually had a river birch that succumbed, and I know exactly how much that hoop of fire would have cost, or the logs that are beautiful that are, and it's like, I'm glad nobody can actually get into my driveway with a trailer to get it out of there. But that's probably drought stress. So, yeah. So I put Niobrara birch, which is our native selection of paper birch. It's a white birch. It's not widely available. It is becoming a little bit available. The Arboretum has it occasionally. Heather has it occasionally. It's truly a white birch. The downside on it is over time, it's probably going to be susceptible to bronze birch borer. But we all get something someday, right? Black locust. I love it. Now it's thorny. So don't put it in a spot where you have small children and pets. And it does colonize and forms a thicket. And there is probably nothing more sweetly scented in this state than a colony of black locust in flower. There are a handful that have been used as front yard trees on Sheridan Boulevard, just east of the 40th Street roundabout. And they have not colonized and formed a suckered at all. They're just these big, rugged old trees. We have a couple still on campus. But if you drive west on West A or east on A, there are big colonies in the ditches. Small foliage, nitrogen fixer, good substitute for honey locust, except they do have thorns, stipular thorns, little tiny thorns. Turkish filbert is on my list, related to filbert in the same family. Again, pyramidal, uniform, a little slow growing, very dense, great catkins, fabulous catkins. In flower, it looks like yellow fringe hanging all over the tree. Now it does get filberts in these little involucre things, and they're these husky little deals, and the squirrels like the nuts. Not so great as a street tree in a couple locations, partly because I think the environment didn't tolerate it, but they're tough. They're an acreage tree in my book for sure. Okay, littler guys, Tatarian maple, hot wings, which has samaras that are go big red. We have a couple hot wings on campus. There's also one called Pattern Perfect. In the West, this is considered invasive. We have not seen seedlings on this yet. Again, we're talking in the 20, 25 foot range and typically multi-stemmed. The one that's most visible is directly north of the East Campus Union, kind of against the edge of the parking lot. You don't really notice it unless the samaras are samara-ing. Horse chestnut, we looked at the incredible texture. You've got multiple options, including the red, which is a hybrid, slower growing. There is a rust that affects them. They are monstrous, beautiful texture and dangerous. So if you have children that want to throw things at one another, do not put this in your landscape. because they're great to have wars with.
Because they what?
They're great to have wars, like throw those buckeyes, because the husk on them is pointed. It looks like a mace, you know, and probably would take your eye out. Yellow wood. This is a little bit brittle. So I wouldn't throw it out in the conditions where the wind can really snap it. It's also susceptible to included bark, which means you need to manage when young. But this is a tree, again, that's a nitrogen fixer, bean family. Flowers in Mayish, big, beautiful panicle of white flowers that, again, you will walk across campus and think, what smells so good? There is one on the market called Perkins Pink. We've tried it. Typically it reverts. So I don't know that anybody actually has a Perkins Pink that's still pink. We have a number of these. This is on the northwest corner of Plant Sciences Hall. Okay, Osage orange. You need a tough stir. Pick one of these. Pick the thornless male if you don't like the oranges, but at least pick the thornless because they'll live forever. And they're very ornamental, truly. The foliage is shiny. Nothing really eats them. Quaking aspen. We have the beautiful colony on campus. Just like sumac, you have to rejuvenate the colony. You have to take the old stems out. You can buy prairie gold if you wish. It will not sucker until it is stressed, and then it will. You will get suckering off of it. You can expect about 15 years out of the big stems, and that's about it. And they do get a foliar disease here in August. It turns the leaves black. Not a thing you can... Say what? Yeah, yeah, the big stems. Yeah, yeah, off with its head. Yeah, and the foliar disease in August is, it looks like black tar. Here's those upright oaks. We saw the upright English oaks. You use them totally differently. There are a lot of them on the market now. Regal Prints and somebody and somebody. And again, you have to decide if you want a trunk and then branching, or you want all that branching at the base, like the old poplars that were the windbreak poplars. That's what they remind me of, only they're an oak. They're not gonna be awful. Some of them get great fall color, like Crimson Spire. This is a new birch, and I said I wouldn't put a birch on the list, but this is out of North Dakota, and that is what it looks like. So it's this really vertical, we heard about this about 10 or 15 years ago, actually. Not real available here yet. I think Todd Fowler carried it for a little while, but very distinct in terms of the form. So I already, whoops, Shawnee Brave, bald cypress. That's the vertical one. So if you don't have room for the one we saw in the Arboretum and you really like bald cypress, this is the one you can use instead, which is they'll take dry, they'll take wet. They look less like a dead evergreen in the winter than the other one does. Okay, I had to throw in a spruce just because. This is baby blue eyes. There's a lot of new Colorado spruces on the market that are smaller, if you like the spruce. And then I had to throw in a creeper, because remember that whole thing on these are really trees, even though they forgot to grow up. So this is the creeping Norway spruce. We have a big one over in the at the top of the hill. You have to cut the leaders out if it throws a leader. Otherwise it turns into something that looks like it belongs on Star Wars. There's a big one on Memorial Drive in front of Tom and Harriet Potter's house that they didn't cut the leader out of it, and part of it does this and the other part of it goes whomp, just like that, about 10 feet tall. I wish we could get our hands on this. Japanese tree lilac ivory silk plus has been overused on this campus. It's tolerant of pollution, it blooms white, it doesn't drop anything, you know, all those kinds of things. But copper curls is a pecan lilac, and that's a different species, and the bark peels like a cherry. Peels like cherry, almost like that, the prunus that we saw, the Prunus mackii that we saw. This is also a North Dakota release, so that tells you how tough it is. All right, this is our favorite magnolia, and this is Merrill, and it's a big honker. And it is as reliable as you can possibly imagine. The magnolias really do well here. And remarkably better in terms of bud hardiness now that we're a little bit different zone. And again, everything was 3 weeks advanced, and that's just the way it was. This is outside the doors. It's the big one over there. It's been there since I put the flag in the ground in probably 1989. No, 79. So that gives you a notion of how big that one gets. It's a big one. All the box stores carry Jane and Sarah and Juliet and all the girls. And they're probably okay if you know how to plant them properly. Most of the nurseries carry good ones. Yes. Go to your room. Go to your room. No, the star, you're going to want star magnolia if you want to keep it small, but you can't keep it that small. Part of the issue with something that does not want to genetically be small is when you try to reduce it like that, as opposed to the hydrangeas, what you're really doing is stressing the plant to the point where it may flower beautifully at this level for a number of years, but you're weakening its longevity. There are some smaller stars on the market as opposed to this big guy, and that's what I would look for. There's also a pink star magnolia called Royal Star that's really quite beautiful. There's the yellow ones too, if you really want to go that way. The best one in Lincoln got cut down. It was on 40th by the Gray House. I don't know why they cut it down, but they did. Paradia. I wish more people would try it. It's really unusual. It's in the witch hazel family. We have one in here in the courtyard. It's a zone 4. I have one in the backyard that was scratch and dent with a bad root ball on it, and it's been there for years. Exfoliating bark. All of the foliage emerges with that little, like the reddish tinge to it. Weird little flowers that don't even matter, but this interesting structure. It wants to be a specimen. It's probably going to be about 20 feet tall at the most. You know, that's a really good question. I've never looked it up. It's Paradia persica, as in Persia. So yeah, yeah, well, exactly. And maybe it's because it's sort of colorful when it foliates. I don't know. That's a good question. Now, we looked at chokecherry. Bird cherry is its European relative, Prunus padus, and it is beautiful. It is one of the earliest of the prunuses to leaf out and flower. The racemes are distinctly longer. The foliage is bigger. The bark is way more cherry-like, and it's a single stem. It's hard to find. I used to use them on campus a lot, and they're not using them anymore. White bud instead of red bud. Go right ahead. This is a bad year for red buds. I have a lot of dead buds at my house. And they are red buds from a native source, and they're still dead buds. Pawpaw. Awesome. Yeah, they are slow, but they're shade tolerant, and they'll colonize and form a little colony for you. Monster tropical leaves. The weirdest fruit ever. It's disgusting. Ugh. Yuck. Anything that has custard-like texture and tastes like a banana is not on my list. And then serviceberry. And we looked at the Regent serviceberry, the upright form. Do not fall for single stem serviceberry, because serviceberry wants to either be a multi-stem small tree or a suckering shrub. And if you get the single stem serviceberry called Autumn Brilliance, it's going to sucker. And you're going to cut it off, and it's going to sucker more. So don't go there. Coosa dogwood is actually the dogwood that it blooms latest and is toughest here. And again, the dogwoods, flowering dogwood and Coosa dogwood, are becoming more capable of withstanding our conditions if you give them decent soil and wind protection. Blooms in June. or late May with all the foliage is already on all the rest of the plants. There's a lot of Coosa dogwoods in the Sheridan Piedmont neighborhoods. Here's that pattern perfect maple. That's the other small one with the samaras on it. Somebody asked me about weeping mulberry. Here it is. It's a living playhouse. And no, it doesn't fruit. It's male. Fabulous if you want a living playhouse for small creatures. The crab apples, pick one. Pick one that is resistant to diseases. Do not go to a box store and buy one they tell you is good. And you can pick any form. This is Adirondack, which stays like this. The weeping forms, red jade is still the oldest of them. Donald Wyman is humongous. I really like the crab apples. I'll just be honest, because they smell good. The birds like the fruit. And I really kind of like to prune. Coral burst is a fully double dwarf, and it looks like a flowering cherry. And the best ones are on the south side of C.Y. Thompson Library until they fix it, and then they'll tear them out. Fully double. People don't even realize it's a crab apple. You can't even see the foliage when it's in flower. There's one on the south side of the dairy store. So when it's time for ice cream, go look. Here's that carnelian cherry dogwood that we looked at in true flower with the drupes. They are edible. It's an acquired taste. And here's the Seven Sons shrub that you can't say 6 times, like six sheep and things. And what you're looking at is the calyces, or the spent flower heads on it. You do have to keep after it. It gets a lot of winter dieback. This is a dandy. Not very many of them available. We have one right out here. I think the Arboretum carries them. This is native, understory tree. Really an interesting little tiny flower, followed by a seed pod that looks like the old bellows bladder, like, you know, the old bellows thing. Okay, we're into shrubbies right quick. Here's Fritchie spirea. Remember that the early spirea, or the summer blooming spireas, you can prune now. And this is one of them. This is one of the best because it looks like a viburnum. It has bigger flowers, bigger foliage, and good fall color. West side of the forestry building is still probably the best one in Lincoln. Here's the pink one, pink and white. Here's the garland that we just saw in full flower right now. We talked about tiger eyes, and again, once they start to sucker, get after those big canes, or you're going to lose the colony. They do not transplant well. Part of the reason they're so expensive in the trade is they don't have much root system if you dig one up. Here's our PJM rhododendron. Again, very little management is required on these if you buy them from a good source. You put them in good soil that is already acid. Mix in, it's one of the few times we say mix in some peat moss. Give them moist but well drained, so don't overwater, and give them some protection from shade and wind. And know fully well that they're going to bloom once and be spectacular, and then they're going to be quiet for the rest of the season. They can be easily damaged by rodents. I lost one this year, and I thought, what in the world is going on? And I went like this, and the underside had been colonized by creepy voles. The voles, yeah. Lilacs, we didn't talk much about them, but if you might as well, because they're just wonderful, aren't they? Buy from a good source. Prune after flowering. Do not call us on Backyard and say, well, I pruned my lilacs last week, why won't they bloom? Okay, Sorbaria is one of those ground cover shrubs. And the one called Sam is in the courtyard. It's a little smaller. It's a little bit more interesting in that it comes out kind of a chartreusey color. It's called false spirea. It blooms its little head off in June-ish. Elegant foliage. It colonizes and runs. West side of the Beetle Center. That monster slope by the dairy store where it has actually gone over across the sidewalk a little bit, but it's taken it 30 years. It'll get like this if you don't prune it back because it's suffrutescent. You should prune it back. So, You know, and it is one of the ones, if you anger management is an issue, go ahead and take the weed whacker and do it. And you're just fine. Yeah. Coral berries. I like the regular old native coral berry, which is this one right here. The newest ones are candy and whomever, and they're hybrids, and they've got great big old pink or white. They're using them all over downtown in the bioswales. We'll see how they do in terms of management, because they're not a suffrutescent shrub, they're a real shrub. They'll colonize in dry shade, and the best colony we have on campus is south of the Union where the black locust is. Beautiful. And they still have their fruit right now. And if you like to cut things and bring them in, this is one of your things. We already looked at the Carlesii viburnum, that brand new one that I've already forgotten the name of. But everybody should have one because they don't take much management and they smell awesome. And Wentworth or Haws or any of the American cranberry bush types. Now these are going to get bigger, but they're also going to have fall color and great fruit that persists, but they are the ones that get ash lilac borer. So you're going to have to cane them out. Take the big canes out. Double file. So we looked at the Cornus alternifolia, the pagoda dogwood. This is the viburnum that has horizontal banding on it as well. It's big. There's been a lot of hybridization and selection of cultivars of the double file viburnums for smaller packages. We have several of them out in our viburnum collection east of the building that are just now getting established. So that'll be really worth a look. But they bloom like a flight. It's sterile flowers on top of the branches. It looks like a flight of white butterflies. Just exactly like what you see. Chokeberry, need I say more? Get the little one if you don't want the big one, because the house that was buried in the shrub, that was the big one. This is Regent Service berry that we looked at with the edible fruit and the beautiful flowers, multi-season. I didn't talk about Japanese Caria, but another shrub that colonizes in dry shade and has brilliant green stems and really elegant foliage. The unfortunate thing is it blooms yellow. Blooms yellow. And they kind of fight with each other, the yellow and the green. But then it's done. So you don't have to worry about it. And it's not suffrutescent. So it's really this really fine textured little green spreading thing. There's the flower. Clove currant could be used more than it is, not because it's pretty, but because it smells good. And the currants are edible. And one thing about managing currants is you have to keep new wood in the plant. If you're growing them for fruit or health, you have to take those old stems out about a third every 3 years, or every year, a third every year. They can, yeah. So can this, which is sweet spire. And this is out in the courtyard, and it loves it wet, and likes the shade, and blooms and smells great, and then turns the color of Merlot wine. In fact, there's one called Merlot on the market. The witch hazels. You can get the big native that blooms in October, or you can get the hybrids that have already bloomed out without foliage. They are unbelievable in fragrance. And once you get them established, they are really tough. They will tolerate dry conditions. The blue hollies, if you have the shade, get the blue hollies. You got to have a boy and a girl if you want the fruit. And they need little, if any, pruning. They're stiff habit. You can prune and bring them in for Christmas if you want. They tolerate 40 below zero as long as you put them in a shade condition. This is the gray dogwood that's the best. Gray dogwood is native. Those of you who are familiar with the big one, it colonizes just nature paints with gray dogwood. A lot of farmers hate it because it spreads too much. Muskingum is the short one. And it does everything the big one does, except doesn't get big and doesn't spread. Doesn't fruit quite as well, but the fall color is absolutely spectacular on it. We have muskingum over in our backyard farmer garden. We moved it from the south side of the building.
Sun or shade?
Prefers full sun, but it'll tolerate half shade. It won't tolerate the shade on the south side of Kyme Hall under the ash. So we moved it. Don't. Because they won't. They just don't rebloom. It's not worth the money. It's not worth it. Yeah, that's that marketing thing that I said, don't buy your plants based on who wants to market it to you. Except for me, because we've tried them. Buttonbush, this is the new Sugar Shack, which is the little one. We don't know how big yet because we just got it. But if you want pollinators, you need a buttonbush. And they'll take dry, they will take wet. They do need heavy pruning. Carol just pruned ours just about like we pruned the hydrangeas to bring it back into some sense of character. The flowers are about this big and they smell like honey. Shrub roses, they are shrubs. They are not to be treated by being cut to the ground in the fall. No, don't do it. In fact, our yellow submarine is this tall with foliage this high. We will take it down so it's not blooming 6 feet in the air, but they are truly shrubs. If you really like the shrub roses, you have just done that commitment to management that was that spiral juniper, because they need to be pruned every single year. I had to throw in this because it's not really a shrub, but it's a tree peony. Tree peony, which are woody. And we have a lot of tree peonies on campus now, and they are carrying more and more of them in the stores, and you're going to go ahead and mortgage your first house because they're about $80 a piece. Yeah, but they're truly a woody plant. Then I had to throw this on because it's not a woody plant. It's one of the new ones. This is suffrutescent, but it's shrub-like in its proportions, and it's monstrous in its texture and weight in the landscape. They are very, very, very late to break dormancy. So be aware of that. Midnight Marvel is probably about like this. Some of them are a little smaller, some are a little bigger. We are seeing the hibiscus begin to seed themselves about. If you are familiar with the woods, the woods, 33rd and Sheridan, that little wetland area down in there, there are hibiscus all over the place, and they did not plant them. So here's the hydrangeas. This is what you're after, is this kind of flowering. That's what you get with Dorothy if she behaves herself. Endless bummers, you go right ahead. I didn't even mention them when we were over there, because they're tough. This year, there's not much second-year growth that's alive on them. We looked today. It's all at the base. Blue mist, them there are blue mist spireas. It's not a spirea at all, and it's suffrutescent and blooms in August. And you're going to lose them about every 5 or 6 years. And then they're going to seed themselves all over the place, and then you're going to lose them. So treat it more like a perennial, truthfully. There's the fruit on the beautyberry that we looked at. We'll see what that new one that we looked at actually does. It's not persistent through the winter, so you don't have purple at Christmas. And there's black lace on one side, and there's the new chartreuse one on the other for those elderberries. Go right ahead. Anybody ever tried these? Ugh, nasty. I don't care how good they are for you. I don't want to live that long. All right, so then we just have, if it was Fred, he'd say nature's wondrous pageantry. Go away. Anybody have any questions? I kept you over. Pussy willows are awesome. Treat them as they should be, which is you cut them back so that they will give you those long canes. I'm guessing Bob would carry the bladdernut. I think probably Heather will. Arboretum, NSA. Heather is Great Plains Nursery in Weston. She does now have a retail site. She does have a website, and I think she has her plant list up. She's not open all the time, but she's where I would send people for them. You may be able to get some of them at Todd Fowler's at York. You know, Finke's usually carries some really weird stuff, but I'm not sure Blatternut is on anybody's list just yet. Yes?
The golden prairie aspens, they last 15 years too, like
The prairie gold, yep. Quaking aspen, just by its nature, is short-lived. And if you think about aspen in the mountains, it does this, and then it does this, and then it, yeah.
But I also wanted to tell you, on your handout, because it was so long, I cut out all the pictures that didn't have work.
In other words, she cut it all out.
So I did upload the whole series into Wikio. So you can actually get it and get it in color at home or look at it on your computer at home if you want. So yeah, Gary's already got it. So it was way too big. He's got a book there, so.
That would be me. 300 slides in 300 minutes. And don't forget to send us your questions and really high resolution pictures. If you send us something that says, "What is this?" and you give us no more information, we are not going to answer. We're going to say, "Where are you from? What are you asking us? How can we help you better?"